Nelson Mandela, taking a stand for equality in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was a South African man who, as he stated himself, was born on the 18th of July, 1918, at Mvezo, a tiny village on the banks of the Mbashi River in the district of Umtata, the capital of Transkei. His real name was given to him by his father before his well-known name Nelson, and it was Rulehahla. The colloquial meaning of his name was troublemaker, a name which his friends and family, as he said himself, would ascribe to my or his birth name, the many storms I or he both caused and weathered. Nelson Mandela was actually first practicing under the field of law. He passed away on December 5, 2013, due to respiratory tract infection. The thesis statement is, although you may consider battles and wars as more important and significant stands in history, Nelson Mandela's stand was really important and significant. His stand was difficult to uphold and is considered a humongous stand in history because he fought against many opponents and unjust people while also being treated unfairly and outnumbered and hated by many people, some considering him a terrorist. However, he continued to fight as he stood purely for nothing other than equality. In South Africa, those who were lighter skinned had more power and rights, while the others were oppressed. Basically, there was a lot of racial discrimination, leaving those with darker skin oppressed. He stated himself, white supremacy implies black inferiority. This explains and shows how the color of skin played an effect in South Africa at the time. Nelson Mandela felt oppressed and took a stand because of the treatment and oppression given. He felt that all were equal and all should have freedom, and so that is what he fought for. He also knew that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. He also knew that to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity, and so that is why he fought for equality, freedom, and the rights of all. His first movement to taking a stand for equality in South Africa was in 1943. He and others had created a group by the name of ANC, but it was not until 1944 when the plan was put into action. On Easter Sunday in 1944, the group successfully was formed. This group called for civil disobedience and also called for strikes against the government. However, there were also other groups calling for strikes as well. There was a group called the Communist Party who called for a one-day strike which would take place on May 1st and would be called Freedom Day. Many, such as himself, did not really support this one-day strike, but he participated anyways. This walkout was pretty much considered a fail because many activists got hurt, but the African activists for equality would not give up. Instead, they realized that they could not plan a strike without support as they had tried on May 1st, where there was not much support given. Due to the attempt of a stand by the Communist Party on May 1st and having failed, the ANC group and other African activists decided to have a bigger and more supported strike. The strike was also dangerous as participants had to put everything of theirs at risk, including their houses, family, jobs, etc. At first, this day was planned and called the Day of Protest. On this day, June 26th, 5,000 people put on a demonstration under the ANC and had a major effect as it reached many major headlines. The impact and effect of the strike on June 26th was huge. The information reached major headlines and was heard nationally. The strike on this day was the first attempt made by the ANC to hold a political strike at a national level against the government and was a moderate success. This day was later observed as Freedom Day, and as he said himself, from the perspective of the ANC and himself, boosted our morale, made us realize our strength, and set a warning to the Malong government that we would not remain passive in the face of apartheid. Nelson Mandela was arrested and charged along with 155 others under treason in 1956 because the South African government accused him of treason as he participated in stands against the government. His trial went from 1956 to 1961 when he was acquitted. After the trial in 1961, Nelson Mandela decided not to return home right away. He did not return home in fear that he would get arrested again as the officials could strike at any time. He decided to go underground and he traveled with many different groups. However, he did not give up with working and planning to still stand against the injustice of the government. So as he stated himself, my time underground was mainly taken up in planning the May 29th stay-at-home. The May 29th stay-at-home was organized and conducted by Nelson Mandela. His statement for participation was very strong and powerful. His statement basically stated that the government was showing injustice and racial discrimination, and those who participated were basically showing that they would not put up with the discrimination without a fight. At the end of his statement, after stating the injustice, he stated, "We are not going to be frightened by Verwoerd. We stand firm by our decision to stay home on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. No one who loves freedom should go to work on those 3 days. Let us stand together, united and disciplined. Do not be intimidated by police agents. In December of 1961, Nelson Mandela was given the task to be the commander-in-chief of an army while having no combat experience. He had to start and command this army, which would be called Umkhonto we Sizwe, or the Spear of the Nation. He stated himself, I, who had never been a soldier, who had never fought in battle, who had never fired a gun at an enemy, had been given the task of starting an army. It would be a daunting task for a veteran general, much less a military novice. Later, as he helped and evolved more, he gained the name of the Black Colonel. Nelson Mandela eventually returned back to the land of South Africa. He had been underground for 17 months, and when he came back, he was sentenced for 5 years in prison after being convicted of leaving the country illegally. In 1963, the police raided a farm in Rivonia where ANC had set their headquarters. This led to the arrest of Mandela, along with many others, to be tried for attempt to overthrow the government. Mandela was tried and then sentenced to life in prison as he was found guilty of this conspiracy. However, he also gave his famous speech.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunity.
After the Rivonia trial, Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in imprisonment. At the beginning of his imprisonment, he had stated that he had refused to wear short trousers and eat the food given, and first had agreed to isolation to get privilege of long trousers and choice of food. However, he hated isolation as it was torture, so he eventually got out of the isolation. He was first imprisoned at Robben Island, but later got transferred along with a few others to Portsmouth Prison. In 1985, Nelson Mandela had an opportunity to be released and leave jail. However, he refused because there were conditions to that release. He would have to give up standing for what he stood for and never make a stand against the government again. He did not agree to this because he wanted to stand for equality and what is right. He wanted to stand for equality, justice, and freedom. In 1988, Mandela was transferred again, this time to Victor Verster Prison Farm. This was more like a home than a prison and was quite comfortable to him. He stated and described it as, the only thing spoiling the idyllic picture was that the walls were topped with razor wire and there were guards at the entrance to the house. Even so, it was a lovely place and situation, a halfway house between prison and freedom. On July 5, 1989, Mandela met the President of South Africa, Mr. Botha. This meeting was intended to be private and they discussed primarily history of South Africa and little of the issues. When Nelson Mandela asked for release, Mr. Botha said, afraid not. Not too long after Mr. Botha and Mandela met, Mr. Botha resigned. A new president by the name of F.W. de Klerk was sworn in as the new president. He promised to negotiate for peace, and surprisingly, he was true to his word. Instead of banning a later rebellion, he allowed it as long as things were kept peaceful. Then, on October 10, 1989, President de Klerk announced that Walter Sisulu and 7 of Nelson Mandela's former Robben Island comrades were to be released. On February 2, 1990, the president released a ban which had been placed on the ANC and promised that Nelson Mandela would be released shortly. On February 11, 1990, Nelson Mandela, at the age of 71, is released from prison. This was not the end of his stand for equality. Throughout the years, Nelson Mandela continues to stand for equality, and in 1993, he and President de Klerk are both awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The next year, in 1994, ANC wins majority votes and Mandela becomes the President of South Africa. On May 10, 1994, he gets sworn in as president, and as he gets named the president and he gets sworn in, an end is put to the era of apartheid, and his stand is successful and one not to be forgotten in history. In 1999, Nelson Mandela is succeeded by Thabo Mbeki. At the time, South Africa still had issues such as poverty, but it had made its transition to a democracy. In 2004, he retires from public eye, becoming more quiet and private as he spends more time writing his story. In 2012, he is diagnosed with a chronic lung problem developed during his imprisonment, and then sadly on December 5, 2013, He passes away due to respiratory tract infection.